Everyone thought I was the dutiful daughter, until I cut my toxic parents out of my life for good. My name is Melanie. I'm 33 now, and to be completely honest, I feel like I've been 33 since I was 16. That's when I started holding the family together, or at least that's how my mom put it every time something went wrong. Money was tight, Dad lost his job again, Trevor got in trouble at school, the power got shut off because someone forgot the bill. "Melanie, you're the only one I can count on," she'd say. And every time, I'd drop everything, cancel my plans and fix it. That sounds noble. It's not. It's exhausting. And it started long before I even realized what was happening. My mom, Barbara, is the kind of woman who talks sweet in public and slices you to ribbons in private. Picture every overbearing, passive-aggressive, controlling mom you've ever seen in a movie and crank it up a few notches. That's Barbara. She controlled everything. I don't just mean the usual, "You're not wearing that out-of-the-house teenage stuff." I mean everything. What I wore, how I spoke, what electives I took in high school, who I hung out with, what time I had to be home even when I was in my 20s. Sundays were a sacred event in our household. Not church, mind you, Barbara's version of family day. We'd all sit around the house in uncomfortable clothes while she made us listen to her complain about her life for hours. And I had to be there. Always. Even when I was working full-time and barely had a day off, even when I was sick. Family first, Melanie. Don't be selfish. Trevor never had to deal with any of that. He's my younger brother, 9 years younger, and somehow he got to be the normal one. Barbara doted on him. I mean, don't get me wrong, she still tried to control him too, but he just didn't care. He'd walk out the door in ripped jeans and a hoodie, and if she said something, he'd roll his eyes and leave anyway. She never knew what to do with that. But with me, she knew exactly how to twist the guilt knife just right. I was the responsible one, which apparently meant I had to live my life for hers. I never got to move out. Every time I saved up enough to start looking for an apartment, something would happen. Dad's hours got cut, the car broke down, Trevor needed help with school. Barbara would come to me, tears in her eyes, and say, "Melanie, I don't know what we'd do without you." And like an idiot, I stayed. I think the moment it really hit me, like really deeply hit me, was the day I turned 30. I was sitting in the kitchen eating leftover cake from my own birthday, alone, because Barbara had forgotten it was my day. She'd scheduled a neighborhood board meeting at our house, didn't even mention my birthday until I brought it up, and then handed me a grocery store card with no signature. I asked Trevor later if he knew about it and he just said, "Oh, I thought your birthday was next week." I just sat there chewing that too sweet frosting and thinking, this is it. This is my life. This is all it's going to be. But I didn't do anything. Not right away. I kept going. I got up the next day and drove Barbara to her doctor's appointment. I paid the internet bill again because she had so many things on her plate. I called the school to talk to Trevor's guidance counselor when he failed 2 classes. I lived like that for another 3 years. Then something shifted. Not in them, in me. It started small. I stopped answering the phone every time she called. I said no when she asked me to miss work to take her to the hair salon. I told Trevor he'd have to figure out his own FAFSA. And every time I did, I braced for the explosion. But it never came. Barbara would guilt-trip me, sure, but it was weaker somehow. Like she wasn't used to me pushing back and didn't know how to escalate it. The final straw came last year. Barbara announced, during one of her Sunday family talks, that she was thinking of renting out the guest room to a friend from church. I reminded her that I used that room as my home office, because yes, I was still working full-time and paying half the household bills, and she just said, "You'll figure something out. You're good at that." That was it. No discussion. No consideration. Just a reminder that I wasn't a person to her, I was a resource. So I left. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't scream or cry or slam any doors. I packed a few boxes, loaded them into my car, and drove to a friend's place who had offered me her spare room a dozen times over the years. I told Barbara I was moving out and she said, "Well, don't expect me to cover your phone bill anymore." I said, "I've been paying it myself for the last 6 years." She blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. Now I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's not fancy. The walls are thin and the heater rattles when it kicks on. But it's mine. I come home to silence, to peace. And I never realized how much I needed that until I had it. Barbara still calls, still texts. She's trying a new angle now, sweet, wounded mother who just misses her daughter. Sometimes she even pretends to forget the years she controlled every move I made. But I remember every Sunday I wasn't allowed to skip. Every time I couldn't go out with friends because she needed me. Every moment I spent living a life that wasn't mine. Trevor's doing fine. He moved in with his girlfriend and works as a mechanic. We text sometimes. He doesn't get it. I don't expect him to. So yeah, that's my story, or at least the start of it. I don't know what's going to happen next. But for the first time in my adult life, I get to choose. For most of my life, I didn't believe anyone would actually love me the way I needed to be loved. I don't mean candlelit dinners and handwritten poems. I mean someone who would listen to me, respect my thoughts, and not make me feel like a piece of furniture in someone else's house. That changed when I met Chris. Chris wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't try to fix me or push me to be anything other than what I was. He was calm, grounded, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe around someone. I remember telling him early on about how I still lived with my parents at the time, how complicated my family was, how I'd always felt like a background character in someone else's story. And instead of recoiling or making a joke, he just nodded and said, "That sounds heavy. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore." It sounds small, but to me it was everything. We dated for almost a year before he proposed. It wasn't extravagant, no fancy rooftop or flash mob, just the two of us sitting on a picnic blanket in the park where we had our first date. He pulled out the ring and said, "I want to build a life with you. One where you're not second to anyone." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I was over the moon. I didn't even think about how Barbara would react. That was my first mistake. I told my parents over dinner at a restaurant that Chris had made reservations for. We wanted to keep it neutral, public, somewhere Barbara couldn't explode if she didn't like the news. She smiled, but it was that tight-lipped, frozen kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Well," she said, setting down her fork, "of course I'll handle the wedding planning. We want it to be perfect." Chris glanced at me and squeezed my hand under the table. I cleared my throat and said gently, "Actually, we were thinking we'd hire someone or maybe keep it small and plan it together." Barbara laughed. Not a normal laugh, more like someone choking on something bitter. "Oh, Melanie, don't be ridiculous. This is what mothers do. It's tradition. I planned your cousin Ava's wedding and it was the highlight of the year." I tried to say no again. I told her it wasn't about disrespect, that we just had our own vision. She waved her hand like I was a child asking for dessert before dinner. "You're not going to embarrass the family. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and I will not have you ruining it with some park picnic nonsense." Then she turned to Chris and smiled in this syrupy, fake way. "And of course, we'll want to discuss your name." Chris blinked, confused. "My name?" "Yes," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You'll be taking our surname. It's important to preserve the family name. We don't have any boys to carry it on, and Melanie is our only daughter. You'll be part of our family now, after all." Chris thought she was joking. He laughed a little and said, "Oh, I don't think that's how that works." But Barbara didn't laugh. Her expression didn't change. "I'm serious," she said. "This isn't just about the two of you. It's about legacy. Our family has always done things a certain way, and I will not have Melanie marry into a name that means nothing to us." I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water over my head. She didn't even see us as people. We were just chess pieces for her little legacy game. Chris looked stunned. "With all due respect, Barbara," he said, keeping his voice calm, "Melanie and I will make decisions about our future together. That includes names, the wedding, and everything else. We appreciate your input, but this is our life." Barbara's face turned to stone. She stared at me like I'd just committed some horrible betrayal. "So you're letting him speak for you now?" she said. "Is this who you've become? You let a man take over your decisions and erase your family? After everything I've done for you." I wanted to scream. For so many years, I had kept the peace, played the good daughter, taken her manipulation in silence. But not that night. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You never did those things for me. You did them for control. And I'm done letting you control my life." She got up and left the restaurant without saying another word. My dad paid the check without speaking and followed her out. Chris and I sat there in silence for a long time. Part of me expected to break down, to feel guilty or scared, but I didn't. I felt free. It was a week after that dinner where Barbara demanded Chris take our family name. We'd had radio silence since then, which honestly was a blessing. I had started to feel that unfamiliar sensation of peace creeping into my life, and Chris and I were already looking at small wedding venues on the coast. Something intimate, personal, far from the chaos that had always surrounded my family. Then the phone calls started. First, it was just text. Let's be reasonable. You're throwing away decades of tradition. We need to talk. I ignored them. Then Barbara called. I let it ring. Then she started calling from my dad's phone, from the house line, even from numbers I didn't recognize. Finally, I picked up. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. The first words out of her mouth were, "Are you really doing this to us?" I knew what this meant. I took a deep breath and said, as clearly and calmly as I could, "Yes. We're planning the wedding ourselves. Chris is not changing his last name. We're not using your venue, your planner, or your ideas. This is our wedding." There was a pause, like the silence right before a storm. Then it began. Her voice went high and sharp, all but screeching through the phone. "You are erasing your family. After everything we've done for you. Do you have any idea how ungrateful you sound right now? We spent over $70,000 on you. On your schooling, your braces, your summer camps, your therapy." It was like a floodgate opened. She started listing everything they'd ever done for me, big or small, like it was some kind of invoice I'd forgotten to pay. And the number, $70,000, kept coming up like it was a trump card. I stood in the middle of our living room, staring at the wall while she kept yelling, my phone hot against my ear. Chris had walked in during the call, saw my face, and didn't say a word. He just sat beside me and put his hand on my knee. Barbara finally shouted, "You're making a mistake. You're destroying everything this family has built. Do you even care about us?" That's when I said it. The first real, final, unshakable no. "I'm not your project anymore," I said quietly. "I'm not your second chance at life. I'm done letting you dictate what matters to me." She was silent for 2 seconds. Then the tears started. Not mine, hers. Hysterical crying like I just died. She kept saying, "I don't recognize you. What happened to my sweet girl? You're being poisoned by him. He's changed you." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I said, "No. I'm finally just being myself." She hung up. An hour later, Richard called. My father. The man who rarely raised his voice, rarely intervened in anything emotional, always took Barbara's side in the most passive, disinterested way possible. I answered because I was hoping, stupidly, that maybe he'd say something different. Maybe he'd ask what was going on, try to understand. Instead, I got exactly one sentence. "You're being incredibly selfish, Melanie," he said. Then he hung up. No discussion. No follow-up. Just gone. I stared at the call log for a long time after that. Then I put my phone on silent and slid it under a pillow. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. I just sat there, letting it settle in. That was the first real no I had ever said to my mother, and the last time I let either of them make me feel guilty for it. That was the moment I realized. The only reason they were still trying to control me was because I kept letting them. After that last phone call with my father, something inside me just shut off. Not in a sad, numb kind of way, but more like a door closing and locking behind me. I stopped responding to their messages. I didn't pick up their calls. I blocked Barbara's number, then Richard's, then the house line, then the random numbers they kept using to try and trick me into answering. I didn't send out an announcement or have some dramatic confrontation. I just stopped. No more second chances. No more explanations. I realized that as long as I kept even the smallest line open, they'd keep trying to squeeze through. So I cut the line entirely. That same week, I opened a new bank account at a different bank. One that neither of my parents had ever been connected to. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I transferred over every cent of the savings I'd worked so hard to build, more than $120,000. That money had taken years of discipline, skipped vacations, late-night freelance work, and careful planning. And for the first time, it was fully mine. No one else had access. No one else could touch it. I went through every old shared account, every backup contact, every paper trail they might try to follow. I changed passwords, removed emergency contacts, and finally made it so that every part of my life was mine and mine alone. And then I made it official. Barbara had been telling people, friends, extended family, her church circle, that she was planning the wedding. That the dress was her idea, that the venue was already being reserved, that the florist she used for her friend's daughter was going to do the arrangements. She was painting a picture like she was the mastermind behind it all. So I sent one message. Just one. I wrote it carefully. No emotions. No pleading. Just facts. "Mom, I want to be absolutely clear. You are not participating in the wedding. You are not planning anything. You are not attending meetings, making calls, or giving input. This is between Chris and me. Do not make any arrangements. Do not represent yourself as part of this process. You will not have control over this. I didn't wait for a response. I blocked her number again right after sending it. From there, I stopped checking the old email account she still had access to. I let her shout into the void if she needed to, but I wasn't going to be the one listening anymore. Cutting them off was supposed to bring peace, and for a little while it did. Chris and I were making progress with the wedding planning. I was sleeping better, eating better, even laughing again without that lingering anxiety in the back of my mind. But Barbara and Richard weren't going to go quietly. No, they started playing a different game, one where they weren't the villains, but the victims. It started with the relatives. My Aunt Cheryl, who hadn't called me in over a year, suddenly reached out asking if we could talk. She said she'd heard things were tense, and just wanted to make sure I was okay. I knew right away she'd been talking to my mother. Then came my cousin Laura, who messaged me a 5-paragraph essay on the importance of family and how weddings can bring up strong emotions for mothers. I didn't respond to either of them. Then came the setup. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, the one Chris and I had gone to on our second date, when I saw them, Barbara and Richard, standing in line like they just happened to stop in for lattes. Barbara spotted me, put her hand to her chest and said, "Oh, Melanie!" What a surprise! She said it like we hadn't spoken in weeks because I was a brat, not because she had been trying to manipulate me into submission. I didn't engage. I packed up my laptop, walked right past them, and left without a word. That's when it escalated. They started showing up in more places. Outside my gym, at the grocery store, once even parked across the street from my apartment building. Never confrontational, always playing innocent. We were just in the neighborhood. We wanted to make sure you're safe. It was like they were building an alibi in case anyone asked about their behavior. Then came the messages. Not just from them, but from friends of theirs I barely knew. People from their church. Old neighbors. One woman I hadn't seen since I was 10 sent me a Facebook message telling me that cutting off your mother breaks a piece of your soul. Every message had the same tone. Barbara was heartbroken, Richard was devastated, and I was the cold, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family for no reason. Barbara even started crying in public. Chris's coworker ran into her at a local bookstore and texted him afterward. "Hey, not sure what's going on, but your fiancé's mom was sobbing in the biography section and telling the cashier her daughter doesn't speak to her anymore." Another mutual acquaintance said she broke down at a community event and started talking about losing her only daughter and how she prayed every night for reconciliation. It wasn't grief, it was theater. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted pity. She wanted to rewrite the story, to make herself the one who had been abandoned, so people would rally around her and pressure me to come back. And the worst part? Some of them bought it. People started treating me differently. Even in places I felt safe. A barista I used to chat with stopped making eye contact. One of the bridesmaids I'd asked to be in the wedding texted me saying, "Your mom reached out. She seems really hurt. Are you sure you want to go through with all this without her?" I didn't respond. It was exhausting. Every day felt like I had to hold my boundaries with both hands just to keep them from slipping through. They weren't coming at me with demands anymore. They were trying to guilt me into surrender by turning everyone else into their voice. After months of trying to untangle myself from the chaos that Barbara and Richard created, I realized that I needed help. Not just venting to friends or crying into Chris's shoulder help. I mean professional, guided, trained help. So I started seeing a therapist. It took a while to find someone who felt like the right fit, but once I did, it was like the world cracked open. For the first time, I had a space where I could say things without being interrupted, invalidated, or manipulated. And I didn't have to justify how I felt. I could just feel. One of the first things my therapist helped me understand was that what I had grown up with wasn't normal, even though it had been my normal for so long. The control, the guilt, the way my parents used obligation like a leash. It wasn't love. It was manipulation wrapped in the language of family. That realization was like flipping on a light in a room I hadn't realized was dark. It gave me the strength to do something I never thought I would. I reached out to a few relatives. Carefully, one by one. People I remembered being quiet at family gatherings. People who didn't always seem fully at ease around Barbara and Richard. I didn't accuse or blame, I just asked, "Have you ever felt like things weren't okay when it came to how our family works?" The responses started trickling in. And one by one, people started opening up. So I created a private chat room. Nothing official or dramatic, just a safe space for those of us who had spent years being steamrolled, sidelined, or manipulated. I called it Clear Air, because for the first time it felt like we were breathing without pressure. And that's when I learned the truth. I wasn't the only one. Not even close. My cousin Erica said she hadn't spoken to Barbara in 3 years because Barbara had told her she was too heavy to be in her own wedding photos. My Aunt Marianne had once taken out a small personal loan to help Barbara during a rough patch, only to have Barbara deny it ever happened when Marianne asked about repayment. Even my Uncle Tom, stoic, quiet, always neutral Tom, admitted that Richard had threatened to cut him out of the will because he refused to co-sign a loan he knew Barbara couldn't pay off. Story after story poured in. Tales of humiliation masked as concern, advice that felt more like commands, guilt-laced favors that were twisted into lifelong debt. It wasn't just me. I had grown up thinking I was the weak one, the oversensitive one, the only one who couldn't handle Barbara and Richard's strong personalities. But no, turns out they had a pattern. And that pattern had rippled through our whole family like cracks in a foundation we were all told was solid. And knowing that gave me something I hadn't had before, real independence. Not just financial independence, not just physical space, but emotional freedom. The freedom to know I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't making it up. That cutting them off hadn't been an overreaction, it had been survival. We still talk in that chat. Sometimes it's serious, sometimes it's just check-ins or joke. But it's ours. A little corner of the world where the old rules don't apply. Where Barbara and Richard aren't in control. Where we get to speak and be heard and not be dismissed. After everything that had happened, the silence, the manipulation, the guilt-tripping campaigns, and all the therapy in between, the wedding became more than just a celebration, it became a declaration of freedom. Chris and I planned every part of it together, down to the smallest detail. We were united, fully and without compromise, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't making decisions based on someone else's approval. The venue was a historic vineyard 2 hours outside the city, surrounded by golden hills and tall cypress trees. It was elegant, calm, and completely removed from the chaos of my past. We spared no expense. Not because we wanted to show off, but because we wanted it to feel real and ours. By the time everything came together, the catering, the floral arrangements, the music, the guest accommodations, we had spent over $200,000. Every cent was either saved or earned by us. Not a dime came from Barbara or Richard. And that was important. We made a clear, firm decision early in the process. My parents were not invited. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I couldn't trust them not to make it about themselves. I couldn't risk the months of healing I had done being unraveled in a single afternoon. So we hired security. Discreet, professional, fully briefed. They had names, photos, and strict instructions. If Barbara or Richard showed up, they were to be escorted out. No drama, no engagement, no negotiation. We kept the guest list tight. Every single person there knew the story. There were no whispers, no judgment, only support. I walked down the aisle to the sound of a cello playing the same piece I had listened to the first time I sat alone in the park after leaving my parents' house. My dress was simple but stunning. Chris wore a navy suit with a silver tie, and I swear I saw him tearing up when he saw me. And right as the ceremony started, Barbara tried to sneak in. She showed up in some dusty gray car, dressed in pale blue like she thought she was the mother of the bride. One of the security guards spotted her the moment she stepped out. She made it to the outer garden gate before they calmly intercepted her. She acted shocked, hurt, as if someone had made a mistake. She said, "But I'm her mother. I have to be here." The guard didn't even flinch. He simply said, "Ma'am, you're not on the list," and walked her back to the car. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. But she made sure everyone nearby saw the tears rolling down her face as she got back into the car. That was her final performance, I guess. I didn't see it happen. I found out later from one of the planners, but even if I had, I wouldn't have gone to her. Because at that moment, I was standing under a canopy of flowers, holding Chris's hands, promising myself to someone who had never tried to control me, never asked me to shrink to make room for him. I was surrounded by people who loved me for who I really was, not for what I gave them. And when we said our vows, I wasn't thinking about who wasn't there. I was thinking about how far I'd come. The wedding wasn't just the happiest day of my life. It was the first day I got to live it on my own terms. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the laughter and the clinking of glasses, It came time for the first dance. Chris and I had picked our song months earlier, something soft and old-fashioned, the kind of melody that doesn't need lyrics to say everything. We danced together first, of course, and it felt like floating. But what I remember even more clearly is what happened next. Instead of the traditional father-daughter dance, which had been taken from me long before the wedding ever happened, I made a different choice. I walked over to Chris's mom, held out my hand, and asked her to dance. She looked surprised, touched, and a little emotional. She didn't say a word. She just took my hand, and we stepped onto the dance floor together. She had tears in her eyes the whole time, and so did I, but for different reasons than people might assume. It wasn't grief, it was release. It was letting go of everything I had carried for so long and finally allowing someone to stand beside me without strings attached. That dance wasn't about filling a space left by Richard. It was about choosing who mattered now. Trevor was there too. He didn't say much. He showed up quietly, stayed mostly on the edge of the crowd, and didn't cause a scene. He didn't support Barbara and Richard, but he also never stepped into the conflict. He existed in that middle space where silence says more than words, and honestly, I was okay with that. He gave me a brief hug during the reception, said congratulations, and then drifted off to talk with some of my cousins. I didn't expect him to take sides. I just appreciated that, when it mattered most, he came. Barbara and Richard didn't try again after the ceremony. There were no more messages, no more staged coincidences, no more public tears. It was like they finally understood they had no more control left to wield. Or maybe they just gave up trying to look like the victims. Either way, the silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I'd ever known. Chris and I left for our honeymoon a few days later. We spent a week in the mountains, no cell service, no emails, no drama. Just quiet mornings, shared coffee, and the kind of conversations where no one's trying to win. When we got back, the world felt different. Lighter. Like the weight had been lifted not just off my shoulders, but off my chest too. I could breathe easy. No more waiting for the next manipulation. No more looking over my shoulder. The victory wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or confrontations or dramatic goodbyes. It came in stillness. In the quiet look between me and Chris as we unlocked the door to our apartment. In the way I answered phone calls without flinching. In the way I looked in the mirror and finally saw someone who belonged to herself. After I made it clear that Barbara and Richard were not invited to the wedding, and after I blocked every number, email, and account they could possibly use, they did what they've always done. They tried to manipulate the situation from the outside. Barbara started reaching out to people around me. Not close friends, she knew those doors were shut, but old acquaintances, distant relatives, and anyone she thought might still have influence. One day, an old high school teacher messaged me out of nowhere asking if I was really cutting out my parents. Another day, one of my second cousins, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years, suddenly wanted to catch up and see how things were going with the wedding. I didn't respond to any of them. She even tried contacting our wedding coordinator. That's when it hit me how desperate she was. Our coordinator told me she received a voicemail from a woman claiming to be my mother, saying she was just trying to make sure everything was in place, and that there had been some confusion within the family. I had already warned our coordinator ahead of time, and thankfully she didn't fall for it. She blocked the number immediately and flagged it in her system in case it happened again. Richard's approach was different, but just as toxic. He sent a letter, not an email, not a text, a physical letter delivered to my apartment. No return address, just my name in his rigid handwriting. I knew it was from him before I even opened it. Inside was a single typed page. Cold, blunt, no warmth. No attempt at understanding. Just control disguised as paternal wisdom. The line that stuck with me, the one that made my hands shake with fury, was this: "You will regret this most of all on your most important day." Not "we miss you." Not "we're sorry." Just a threat. Dressed up as a warning. That's how deep the manipulation went. Even when completely cut off, they still thought fear would work. They thought guilt would get them in where love no longer could. I didn't respond. I didn't read the letter twice. I didn't think about it for long. I folded it back up, tore it in half, and threw it in the trash. Then I deleted the unknown email accounts they were trying to use. I blocked the new numbers they created. And when they tried to send a mutual friend to just talk, I politely told her not to get involved and never heard from her again. I chose peace. And I chose it over and over again every time they tried to drag me back into their world of control. Every ignored message, every deleted voicemail, every blocked number was another step away from the life they tried to keep me trapped in. They didn't understand that silence was my answer. That no reply was the strongest boundary I had ever built. Months passed after the wedding, and life settled into something peaceful, something solid. I kept seeing my therapist. I stayed close with the relatives who had quietly supported me through the chaos. I never slipped back into old patterns. Not once. I stopped apologizing for setting boundaries. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't deserve access to my life. I stopped feeling like I owed anyone anything for simply existing. Then came the family event. It wasn't something I was planning to attend, but one of my cousins was having a small anniversary gathering, and enough of the people I cared about would be there that I decided to go. I knew Barbara and Richard might be present. I didn't plan on engaging. I just wanted to show up, say hi to a few people who mattered, and go home. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension. People glanced over, whispered in that awkward way families do when drama walks into a room wearing heels and confidence. I smiled, said hello, and kept moving. Barbara was sitting near the back of the room, holding a glass of wine, surrounded by a few people who had always lived a little too comfortably inside her reality. As I walked past, she raised her voice, not yelling, but loud enough that she wanted everyone around to hear. "Melanie betrayed her family," she said. Just like that. No build-up, no shame. Like it was a fact she was offering up for everyone to chew on. I stopped walking. I turned slightly, not to face her, not to make a scene, but just enough that she'd know I heard her. And then I smiled. A small, genuine, calm smile. No sarcasm. No rage. Just peace. And then I kept walking. That was it. That was the moment. Not because I ignored her, but because I didn't feel the need to respond. I didn't feel the pull to defend myself, to argue, to correct the narrative. That part of my life was over. Her words didn't reach me anymore. Her presence didn't shake me. I left that night early, went home to Chris, and made tea. We watched a movie, the kind that makes you laugh without trying too hard. And somewhere between the first sip and the last line of dialogue, I realized that I hadn't thought about Barbara or Richard once since I'd walked through that door. That's what freedom looks like.